All right, great. So I can begin. So today we're dealing with anxiety. Um, so I just wanted to talk about the differences between fear, panic, and anxiety to start with. So the first one I'm going to cover is fear. And this is usually what you experience when there's an environmental trigger. If you've ever gone to a horror movie and suddenly the music starts to feel eerie, you get like a nervous system response. It's very in the moment. Or maybe you come close to having an accident of some kind and you have this initial influx of all these stress hormones and you're not sure what's going on yet and you kind of just letting the moment happen. So when you're experiencing fear, you have a lot of sweating, maybe your breathing gets shallow, your body gets tense, you're mobilized for fight, flight, or freeze, your heart rate's elevated, and then when the moment has passed and you realize that everything's actually okay, then you come back down from that experience. So fear is quite a normal response. It can happen instantaneously. Maybe it can even not always do you have a physical experience. You can also have like a mental thought as a trigger. But most of the times there's something in the environment that causes you to have this reaction and your body's mobilizing to fight or flee. And in some cases you end up freezing, depends on how you react to that stimulus. So I've got a couple points here of what the physical experience is like. This is not an exhaustive list. I'm just giving some examples to help you to be able to see what the difference is between these different categories of stress. So panic is also a very heightened experience of all these stress hormones. You can have an internal trigger or an external trigger. So sometimes you get very overwhelmed and then your thoughts start spiraling out of control and your heart rate goes up and all of a sudden you feel like you can't breathe. You start sweating, maybe you get a bit shaky. You have like this feeling of impending doom or despair. Um, and the way that you react to this experience can be very frantic or irrational. So I have a picture here of a little kid that's lost in a crowd. You know, that moment that mommy's gone and you're alone and there's all these people and you do things that will make it actually harder for mommy to find you. You wander into the middle of the crowd where it's very busy. You're running around in circles. Maybe start like as a kid you would start crying or screaming and no one's able to really help you very well because you're not thinking, you're panicking. So panic, it's a very heightened nervous system response, and it also clouds your thinking. So now we move on to what anxiety is. So anxiety is a much lower nervous system response. You're still very activated. You can feel quite tense in your body. You can have stomach pain. Maybe you're sweating. You notice that your heart rate is slightly elevated, but you're not panicking. You might feel overwhelmed or confused, but you're not making these irrational decisions like in panic mode. So, anxiety can lead to panic, but it can have a lot lower intensity as an experience. A lot of the times with anxiety, it's thought triggered. There can be situations that can provoke anxiety, but for the most part, it's the inner dialogue that you have with yourself that creates this feeling of unease. So, like things that are also not existent in the moment can be a trigger for anxiety. If you're nervous for a future event, if you have a deadline coming up, it's not a physical in the moment danger, but it does trigger all this nervous system response. So, anxiety is very much not just in your head, but the physical nervous system response. I think a lot of times when I see people dealing with anxiety and they go for therapy, and they come out and they talk to me and they're like, oh, I have to do these mindfulness exercises and it's all just in my head. It's not all just in your head, it's in your body as well. So when I like to talk about these topics, I like to think about working with your physical body, as well as working with the thoughts, as well as working with the environment. Because your environment can really add stress to your life or it can reduce it. So I also wanted to point out here, I've got the last point, a prolonged period of time, because anxiety can persist for a lot longer duration than, let's say, panic. Because at some point, when you're dealing with such heightened levels of nervous system activity, it burns itself out. There's a set point when you're panicking that it just, your body can't cope anymore, and so it burns out, and then you can relax again, even if you're not in a safe situation. Whereas with anxiety, because it's a slow burn, it can last for a lot longer as a period of time. So I did want to distinguish between an anxiety attack and a panic attack, because for me, I've had an experience where people use these interchangeably to describe an experience, and it makes it really hard to help someone because what you do for one is not what you would do for another. So with a panic attack, it can feel like that, like the person experiencing a panic attack can feel like they're dying. They're not, it's such an intense experience because the level of nervous system response is very high. So it typically happens for a couple minutes when you're having a panic attack where you start hyperventilating. It can, your heart can start racing so much that it feels like you're having a heart attack. You can have phantom pains or hallucinations, even. Like, these are very intense experiences when you have a panic attack. And an anxiety attack is just a vague sense of unease, restlessness, tension. It can be like an intense experience of overwhelm. Your brain shuts down for a bit, you can't think. So it's also not a very pleasant experience, but it's not as physical as a panic attack. And what's shared in these categories is, again, that nervous system response, where you're feeling maybe nauseous, there can be physical discomfort. Your body is mobilized in both of these instances to deal with a threat, but one is a lot more heightened than the other. So it's just good to know the difference so that if someone comes to you and they're having a panic attack, you'll know how to approach them versus if they're having an anxiety attack. If someone's having a panic attack, the best thing to do to support them is to stay with them in the moment. Don't try to corner them. Don't tell them to just breathe. They need to let it cool off by itself. I told you before, this nervous system response, it burns itself out pretty quickly. So just supporting them, being with them, being a calming, safe presence for them is very, very important. Don't cover their mouths. Don't come close to their necks or their mouths. If they feel even more confined, it can really feel suffocating for them because they are struggling to breathe. But with an anxiety attack, I think a lot of people want that physical contact or closeness to feel calmer. So if someone's having an anxiety attack, you can take them aside, you can help them to rest, you can, again, give them some physical comfort if they want that. But it's a lot, takes a lot longer for them to calm down from an anxiety attack than from a panic attack. Okay, and an important thing to know with a panic attack is that it can just happen out of nowhere. A lot of people with PTSD or traumatic experiences, or even it can actually just be genetic, where there is no known cause aside from the fact that it's in your genes. I think most cases of having panic disorder are actually from genetic related. I don't know how to put that. It's just it's related to your genetics more so than your life events. So if you see someone having a panic attack, don't tell them that they need to alter anything. Most of the times it'll just blow over by itself. And in general, if you're having panic attacks, it's a good thing to go to therapy to deal with it because they will give you the tools to help you in the moment deal with these intense feelings because it can feel like you're dying. So, I just advise in general seeing a professional whether or not you have mental health issues because it can help you to maintain a healthy psychological state. But yeah. So now that we've know the distinction, I want to move on to what stress means in the everyday life. So I have here a graph showing that having low stress can actually be a detriment to your performance. Most things in life to be functioning and improving and growing actually need a little bit of stress in order to improve. If you have no stress, you have no reason to do anything. If you don't get hungry, you won't eat. So, stress is a very multifaceted experience on many different levels. You have physiological stress like hunger, thirst, needing the bathroom. You have psychological stress, um, things like emotions that are overwhelming to deal with, or maybe things like deadlines and needing to cope with those. You can have mental stress where you maybe are fatigued from studying. There's like different aspects of stress, and having just a little bit can really help get you to do anything. If you're hungry, it gets you to eat. So, stress is not the bad thing in life. It is perfectly normal to have stress. It's just if there's too much stress, then it can start to hinder your ability to cope, adjust, and it can cause anxiety. If you have too many deadlines, then you don't know where to start and it gets overwhelming, and that's when you start getting anxiety. So, having a deadline is not bad. In fact, it can help you to hand things in at all because if you didn't have a deadline, you have no motivation to work on something. That's just how these things go. So, it's important to not label the stress as good or bad, but just to be aware that it does help us get things done. So, having a nervous system response can be healthy and it can also be unhealthy. So, I'm going to categorize stressors into two big categories. These are not the official categories. I'm just simplifying for this presentation to get a better understanding, to let you know how, in general, anxiety works along with stress. So, for the first category, I have here high-grade stressors. These are big, impactful moments in life that happen. So I've listed your major traumatic events, injury or illness or loss. So these are things that happen once off. If you have an accident, like a car accident, if you need to move house, if you're getting married, if you're having a baby, these things don't have to be bad to be a stressor. If you're moving country, for example, these things they happen. It causes a lot of stress on you mentally, physically, emotionally, and these cause a lot of stress in the moment and for some time after the event has happened. So, the low grade stressors are the things that are constant over time. So, let's say you have an office that has very cold air conditioning and it makes you feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is a stressor on your body. So, it's continual because it's throughout the day while you're working. If you are on an online space and you have negative interactions, let's say that you have very low morale in your workspace, that is a low grade stressor. It bothers you and it's constant, but it's not something that you feel is life threatening, but it still activates that nervous system response. And lastly, I put your chronic fatigue or chronic illness. At some point after you've been fatigued for so long or ill for so long, the initial non-functionality isn't bothering you as much, but it still impacts on your daily life. So you're able to do less and cope with less, and you get more easily stressed. So to cope with the high-grade stressors, these things can't really be taken out of your life. If you've just lost a loved one, you can't really bring them back. If you've just moved to a new country, even if you move back, you still have all that stress to deal with of packing your stuff, of sorting out your paperwork, and so on. Like they can't just be resolved immediately, or through anything that you do. The best way through the stressor is just to keep going forward and living through it. There is no solution for these, unfortunately. So the best advice I have if you're dealing with something that's stressful is to seek out support from your loved ones, from friends, from institutions around you, because you need some time to adjust. Um, Typically, after a big life event, you need minimum 3 months before you can start to function normally again. And again, this is just an estimate and a rough average. A lot of people can take shorter time to adjust, and other people can take a lot longer. Sometimes you need 2 years to acclimatize to a new country, for example. Other people are fine within a week. You don't know how you're going to react to a big stressor until it happens, and you're working your way through it. So, if you have something that happens that's very traumatic, I would really advise you to get professional help. And even if it's not so traumatic and you're just having some struggles adjusting, I would really advise getting professional help for these things because they're very big events, and most other people most lay people don't really know how to support you through these because they haven't been trained to. So I was talking about, oh yeah, here, giving yourself time to adjust to a big stressor. I think when big life events happen, we tend to be very hard on ourselves and expect ourselves to just get back at it tomorrow. And it's really important to give yourself space to adjust. I know it can feel very difficult, like you have all these deadlines and you have a life to get back to, but it's really important to be patient with yourself. So, if you're kind and patient with yourself, you can get through these stressors a lot easier than if you're very strict with yourself and berating yourself all the time. Life just happens, and you just have to deal with it sometimes, and you don't need to make things harder for yourself when you're dealing with them. And yeah, so the last point I have here, if you're aware ahead of time that something is big is going to happen, it's best to, plan for the worst, but also expect the best. So, like, you want to have a positive outlook on your life, but you also need to be aware of all the things that can go wrong. Because the more aware you are of things that can go wrong and the better prepared you are for them, the much easier it is to get through it. So, having a plan for things is really good, but you don't need to be negative. I think the more negativity you bring to something, the more likely the outcome is going to be bad. Okay, so now we move on to coping with low grade stressors. So, this is more so how to deal with the everyday uneasy anxiety. And a lot of this is going to come to identifying where you feel discomfort. Because anxiety comes from a place of something not feeling nice. So I think a lot of the times we have things in our lives that add stress on a very subconscious level. If you're wearing clothes that aren't so comfortable, they're not fitting well, that adds a level of stress that you don't need. If you're hungry, again, that discomfort adds up over time and can contribute to your feelings of overall stress. Anxiety is very low grade, and at some points we kind of forget about it, but it's still kind of there. If you're not sitting in a very good posture, for instance, that can add stress to, again, your body. So it's important to recognize that stress is not just in your head. It's also very felt throughout the body and emotionally. So in any event or situation where you're not feeling 100% comfortable, think about what's making you feel uncomfortable. Is the discomfort you experience temporary? So let's say you're in the elevator and it's got cold aircon, but you'll be out in a couple seconds, so it's fine. Or is it ongoing, again, where you have very cold aircon throughout the office, and you need to plan for that? So when you notice the discomfort, ask yourself, what can I do right now to address this feeling of discomfort? Like if you're hungry, are you able to eat? Or do you have to wait until a break time? What can you do in the meantime to deal with this? Can you have some water or maybe a light snack before you have lunch? Like think of all the things that you can do to relax in the moment. Like maybe you need to take a couple deep breaths. Maybe you can just unclench your jaw. Like taking a posture of comfort is very helpful with dealing with anxiety. Just relaxing your shoulders, having a deep breath all the way into your stomach, loosening your jaw. Like, I think if you guys want to do this with me, that'd be really great. Just, loosen the parts of your body that feel very tense right now. Okay, and that should already start to ease some of the anxiety you're feeling because you're already dealing with some of the physiological stress that you're experiencing. Then the other part of this anxiety is, can you actually reach out to get help? I know we don't like seeking help. I know we don't like asking others for their input, but if you know that it can help ease some of the stress without making you work so much harder, it's a good idea to just reach out and ask for that help. If you know the person who runs the aircon, again, this is a really simple example, but if you know them and you can ask them, hey, can you put the temperature up just 1 or 2 degrees? That would make me feel better. It doesn't hurt to ask. It never hurts to ask for help. The worst they can say is no. So in a situation where it's more ongoing and it's a bit more complex, there's different ways to tackle it and untangle it. So you can just kind of map out some steps that you're going to take. Let's say you have an exam that's coming up and you know that you're going to be stressed for that time period because it is a stressful time period. What are the things that you can do to make it easier for you to study? Is having a clean desk and cup of coffee ready for you gonna help you feel more relaxed while you're studying? What are the things you can do to support yourselves in these moments of discomfort? And then after you've done all of these steps, the other important thing is to support yourself environmentally. In your workspace, have things that make you feel a little more cheerful. Don't just have bland desk and work. Try and make it a little bit lighter for yourself. Have some pictures of things you like, or maybe you have one of those squishy balls that you can put on your desk to play with every now and again. Maybe you like flowers and you can put some flowers there. Anything that can remind you that you're safe and comfortable. Also things like having a comfy chair is really great for these things. Like you want something with back support so that you're not just sitting for long periods of time in a very uncomfortable situation. You want to make yourself feel as comfortable as possible. Then this next point here is about, just improving your communication skills and talking to others. I think we take for granted talking to people, and we think that you can just say whatever, but talking itself is a skill, and asking for help and collaborating with things is it's very much a skill. And the more you practice asking for things or like collaborating with things, the better you get at it. It's not always going to be easy to verbalize your discomfort, for example. It's not always going to be easy in the beginning, especially in the beginning, to say, hey, I need help with it. Because it can take a long time to just firstly identify the problem and then to take some time to communicate that problem to someone else as well. So there's two parts to this with asking for help. It's also just working on your ability to translate the things you need into words. Then I have here turn off catastrophic thinking mode and turn on planning mode. So we're in a situation where we're overwhelmed and things are just feeling too much. And then we start thinking, if I do this, then they're gonna hate me. I'm gonna get fired. I'm gonna lose my house, my wife, my kids, my dog, blah, blah, blah. The whole world's gonna explode. Like, as soon as the anxiety starts setting in, we kind of go into this internal spiral of all the bad things that can happen. That's not a very good space to work from to make things better. So you can identify, oh, look, my thoughts have run away on the negative train. I don't want to hop on today. Instead, I'm going to focus on making things better for myself. What can I do and plan for myself so that I can limit thinking about all the things that can go wrong and think about the things that I can do that are actionable? So we go back into this, what can I do in the moment to make it better? So, from a brain standpoint, just to get into the more biological point of it, we've noticed, especially with OCD, when you go into this pattern of thinking in a negative loop, the best way to break out of that is to use your executive functioning and plan things out. So that can be writing a list, that can be thinking of the things you're going to do later. Anything to break that loop of thinking, to engage in your executive functioning, can really turn off the downward spiral into negativity. And lastly, again, to reiterate, even if you don't have that many problems and you're just feeling stressed in general, I always advise talking to a professional because they know this stuff better than most people. But it doesn't have to always be a professional that you go to. Whatever resources you have around you is always great to rely on. Talk to your friends, your family, if you have mentors, supervisors, advisors. There are so many people in your network that you maybe are not acknowledging when you're dealing with all of this. And opening yourselves up to receiving that support can be very difficult, but I highly encourage you to find it in yourself to do that. And again, it's a skill. If you suck at it in the beginning and you fail miserably, that's okay. You have to just have that patience with yourself and you will improve over time. The more you are able to verbalize the things inside of you, the better you can seek out support, and honestly, the better you can move through the anxiety. You'll feel a lot less stressed when you know, okay, this is what's wrong and this is how I can correct it. When you're just feeling like everything's wrong and you're in the catastrophic thinking, it can get very overwhelming and you don't know where to start. So I say, for the most part, with anxiety and all these nervous system responses, start with the very physical. That's always the easiest. Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Are you tired? What can you do to untense? Can you breathe? And once those are addressed, you can start addressing the other aspects of it. So once you're physiologically more comfortable, you're a lot more able to engage in executive functioning. So yeah, that brings me to the end. Thank you very much for attending. I'll be taking some questions. And I'm really sorry for those that missed most of it from the beginning. I do think that I've covered the last two very important slides now, so the beforehand was just more of the information.